everyone. My name is Mandy Penney. My pronouns are she and her, and I am the lead educational developer of digital pedagogies and writing across the curriculum at CTL at the University of Alberta. I am joining you a little bit asynchronously today. This is a pre-recorded workshop as I'm unable to join you synchronously this coming Wednesday. As always, this video will be placed online if you'd like to review it or if you know anyone for whom this could be useful. So please do feel free to share that when the link is available within the next couple of weeks or so. While the physical campuses of the University of Alberta are situated on Treaty 6 territory, I'm joining you all today from the traditional lands of the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, and the Lenape peoples. I am in the city colonially known as London, Ontario, which is governed by the London Township Treaty of 1796. And on this slide, I've included two screen captures, native-land.ca or Native Land Digital. If you're not sure whose lands you are currently situated on or the lands on which you grew up, I would encourage you to take a look at this excellent website. I'm always very struck by the comparison between the different ways that you can toggle these maps. And so on the top map, in the top right-hand corner of the slide, you see my geographical area where I'm currently situated, and it is bounded by treaties. And this looks much like any standard map with kind of, socio-political geographical borders. If you look at the bottom map, however, where it is organized primarily by treaty and by nation, what you'll see is that it's much more fluid, much more expansive, and there's a significant degree of overlap among the Indigenous peoples who move through and within these lands. And it sort of, for me, it really resonates in terms of how we talk about our writing pedagogy and how we talk about our relationships with students. And I would encourage you as educators to think about how we can be more fluid, more in relationship with our students when we're working with them on their writing. Who we are as individuals with our own social locations and histories is, of course, deeply contextual and tied to land. As we grow, or as my colleagues Tommy and Everett like to put it, learn, unlearn, and relearn, and as our contexts change over time, we can take time to reflect about how our individual positionality impacts on how we move through the world, how we are seen by the world, and how we can bring conversations and reflection about indigenization and teaching and learning into the classroom and beyond. I wanted to start with this comic strip from phdcomics.com, and I suspect for most of us here, it will be somewhat resonant. If I were with you live, I would ask you in this moment to please raise your physical or your virtual hand or give me a thumbs up if this means something to you. We have a draft of a paper kind of hovering above a pile of papers, and it says, "Hello, Cecilia." In the second panel, it says, "I'm the manuscript you're supposed to be writing. How's it going?" Can you imagine if our manuscripts could talk to us in this way? And Cecilia says, good, not so sure. In the final panel, the manuscript, the draft says, "I feel you've been ignoring our relationship." And Cecilia, putting her head into a magazine, says, "I'm busy." And one of the things that I have found really helpful over the last few years, certainly since 2020, is to open up conversations between faculty, para-faculty, staff, and students about the commonalities that we experience in the writing process, the things that go well for us, the kinds of challenges and barriers that we face, and the different kinds of things that we're sort of thinking about as we're moving through our writing, whether that writing is related to coursework and teaching and learning, or whether that's our research writing, manuscripts, and so on. And I have found it beneficial to open up these conversations because what I have generally found is that there is actually a lot more that we all have in common in this process than what we might find to be different. And so today's webinette is really to urge you to think about some of the ways that you can start talking about the writing process with your students, things that you're perhaps already doing that invite this kind of transparency and relationship building, or different techniques that you might consider trying in order to build that capacity for trust, for communication, for sharing, for reflection about the writing process itself. We do have research that exists on how students understand and engage with writing. And there are some things that we know happen fairly commonly. Students are often unsure about the expectations for writing, and this is all the more true for first-year students, for first-generation students, for students who are English language learners, students whose first or primary English is not this particular kind of English, and students moving between disciplines or degrees. So whether we're looking at bachelor's to master's or from STEM to the humanities, there can be differences in terms of how we write within the disciplines that can make us feel a little bit unsure when we're tackling something new. We also know, of course, that expectations for writing in terms of structure, grammar, tone vary, and these vary from school to school. They vary from country to country and culture to culture. What students tend to need is some level of transparency about your expectations in your class, both in the syllabus, certainly, but also in conversation in the classroom. We also know that the writing process can and should be discussed in the classroom because of what I've just said about that level of uncertainty and the varied experiences that our students may have had. It essentially comprises one part of what we consider to be the hidden curriculum. And the hidden curriculum is a concept that essentially encapsulates all of the different things that students may be expected to know or that they feel that they are expected to know without having any overt support or instruction or guidance in terms of how to engage with them. And some of these can be academic in terms of how we write, some of the expectations in terms of types of assignments, but it can also be about the broader culture of being in post-secondary. For example, if I want to contact my instructor to ask a question or to request an extension on my assignment, I'm not sure what the correct way is to do that. And so when I worked previously in writing centers, what I saw is that students would often come to peer tutors to get some of that information if they didn't have access to it through other channels. Students generally, though, don't always know where to go for help. So that's great for students who know how to find, for example, writing services at the Academic Success Center, but not all students have a broader understanding of what's available to them. And it's all too common to hear in these kinds of academic support units that a student gets to, say, year 3 or 4 of an undergraduate degree, finds out about a service like this, and then says, oh, I wish I had known about this sooner. What we also find is that students will misunderstand the writing process as linear rather than iterative. So this idea that we proceed in this linear fashion from receiving an assignment to doing some research to brainstorming our paper to drafting to revising to handing it in. And even though their experiences may run counter to that, as ours often do as well as academics and as educators, they're so attuned to this sort of, it is a step-by-step process rather than this recursive always circling forward and back and forward and back. And this idea that there's actually no such thing as a fully done paper, the perfect paper, right? That instead the deadline comes to us, and depending on how we've managed our time and what supports we may have accessed, then the paper will perform in an assessment either more strongly or less strongly, depending on those factors. Talking about writing with your students in the classroom in an ongoing way can support the kinds of values that are central to Universal Design for Learning framework, which of course is the idea that students will engage and represent their knowing in a variety of different ways. And we want to plan for that. We want to be flexible with our students, give them choices in how they engage and demonstrate their engagement with the class material, and also pedagogies of care, recognizing that students are whole people, as are we, who come into our classrooms with a variety of different experiences, different values, different goals, and different access needs. So the idea behind bringing these conversations to the classroom is that we are opening up space for transparency so that students are engaged in explicit conversation about what is expected of them, in building relationships with our students so that they feel confident that they can tackle the work and come to you with questions or go to each other for support, that their access needs are going to be met, and that they have some choice in this process. And all of these things really support the idea of an equity or justice-focused approach to teaching writing in the classroom. Having these kinds of conversations in class over time, a little bit at a time, can do a few different things for our students. It can help them sort of come to an understanding of expectations for post-secondary academic and professional writing in specific disciplines and genres. We know that, of course, students want to be thinking about the kinds of writing that they're taking on in their programs and once they get out into their careers. And it's great to have those conversations so that they can see the relationships between the different kinds of writing and communication that they're being asked to do in your courses. It also helps to validate that writing and communication conventions are not homogeneous, that we recognize as educators that there are many different global Englishes, and the kinds of expectations that we may set in our classrooms traditionally are not the only way of knowing, the only way of communicating. To take this a step farther, of course, you can think about your assignment design and consider how you can set up some of these assignments, whether these are low stakes throughout the term assignments or the end of term assignments, to think about how you can make space for some of these different ways of knowing and communicating and being in relationship with each other. Having these conversations with students, especially where and when you feel comfortable to share some of your own experiences as an educator who is a writer, as a scholar who is a writer, is to build a sense of community. That the writing process itself can be messy and challenging, and that is actually an incredibly common experience. And that you can find solidarity, gentle accountability, constructive feedback by building intentional communities within and beyond the classroom. I wanted to share a little bit about what this can look like in your classroom, what this can look like in practice. Some examples include talking about assignments during class time, so not relying on the digital or physical copy of the assignment itself to do all of the work, but rather having that explicit conversation with them when you introduce the assignment, maybe doing check-ins throughout the semester with them to see how they're doing, what kinds of questions are coming up. If your students are reticent to share that aloud, you could, for example, conduct an anonymous survey asking them, what's going well? What are your key challenges right now? What supports do you need? Providing examples or organizational tips can really help combat this idea of the hidden curriculum. So making sure, for example, that you have conversations with them around some of your structural expectations, or if you have previous assignments from students who have completed the course before with their permission, of course, sharing those, or sharing exemplars that you found online that are similar, if not in content, but in structure and approach to the kinds of writing that you're asking them to do in your course. You can also consider sharing some of your own experiences with writing. For me, this is one of my favorite ways to connect with students in the classroom. So I might, for example, talk about the experience of writing my master's thesis and trying to struggle through this idea of how to conceptualize a 100-page research document when up until that point, I had only ever written things that were about a maximum of 20 to 23 pages or so. For undergraduate students, you might talk about some of the first courses that you took that required extensive research and writing, and the things that either went well for you, the things that didn't, the kinds of things that set you up for success in your writing, helping students understand that they're also individuals and can think about what their own process would look like. Are they morning writers, afternoon writers, evening writers? Do they prefer to work digitally or on paper? Do they work better solo or in groups? Do they need to be somewhere that's absolutely silent, or do they perform better, they feel, when they're, for example, somewhere with ambient noise, like a coffee shop or a library? You can also integrate writing workshops into the classroom, and I have some previous webinettes that talk about different ways of doing that. Often that's peer review. That could also be dedicated time to do their own individual writing as well, using a structure like the Pomodoro method, where they're writing in discrete chunks of time and setting goals as they move through. You could also support students in forming reading or writing or study groups inside or outside of the classroom. So introducing them, for example, to how graduate reading groups might work, or social annotation on a shared article that everyone is trying to tackle, or collaborative note-taking, for example. Offering choice and flexibility in writing assignments is another way to introduce your students to the varied ways that folks may communicate with each other. One way that this often manifests is to give students kind of a more traditional assignment, a 10, 12-page research paper or a multimodal assignment. So perhaps record a podcast on a similar topic or design an academic poster that you might show at a conference. Something else that you can do here is to invite units like writing services at the Academic Success Center into your classroom and refer your students to them. Often we mention these kinds of services in our syllabi, but it is helpful to also mention it in class. When I was heading up a writing and learning services unit myself, one of the things I would often do at the beginning of the semester was to reach out to instructors across my institution just to let them know that we were here, what kinds of supports we offered for students. And I would ask if we could have 5 or 10 minutes somewhere at the beginning of the semester to come in and introduce ourselves to our students. Once students had a chance to see us, connect some names and faces, and especially when students in the classroom can see that the instructor is sort of saying, yes, this is a valuable opportunity for you to get some feedback from a peer reader, from someone who is educated, but perhaps outside of your disciplinary area or your topic of choice. That can be really powerful for students. And it is another way to continue that conversation, not just in the classroom, but beyond it. I want to share here really briefly that I read a LinkedIn post by a colleague at Western University, Melanie Ann Atkins, who was recently at the Academic Resilience Consortium. And students were asked in the context of a panel that they were discussing, there were 3 or 4 students, I believe, and they were asked, how did they manage to be resilient? And what did they need for resilience? And there was this unusually lengthy kind of pause. And what they identified was that more than resilience, they wanted to be seen as whole people. And I've quoted on the slide here what Melanie Ann wrote. The message that they needed from their professors, here it is. You're a human being before you're a student. I see you. I'm listening and I care. And my hope is that by having these kinds of explicit conversations with students in the classroom and encouraging them to seek out kind of a community-based approach to writing assignments, to writing assessment, to coming to you with their questions and concerns, what we're also demonstrating to our students is that we recognize that they need time and space to break down these conversations, to understand things a little more clearly, and to seek feedback and solidarity from each other and from you as the instructor. So while I was unable to join you synchronously for this particular webinette, I would still very much love to hear what questions you might have on your mind now that we've come to the end of this component. My colleague, Mike, who is in the Zoom room with you, will post a link to a Menti slide. And what I've offered here is an opportunity for you to identify what you'd like to learn more about, or perhaps what is resonating with you, ways that you might apply some of the things that I've discussed today in the context of your own classroom and your own discipline and your own teaching style. You can also, if you choose, include your name directly on your question or comment. And if you do that, I will reach back out to you personally, and we can always talk further if that's helpful for you. But as always, please do feel free to email us directly at CTL if you would like to request a consultation. Thank you so much for being here with us today, and I hope to talk to all of you again soon. Have a great day.